turn off video. Myra Jolivet created Emmy Award-winning special reports and told stories of true crime during her years in television news. But traditional mysteries motivated her to write the Sarah Doucette Jean Louis series. Like Myra, Sarah is a San Francisco Bay Area native with mystical Louisiana Creole roots. Sarah's story, she leans into Louisiana spiritualism to help her solve crimes. Sarah's story is in the UC Berkeley Bancroft Library, and Myra is currently working on book 4 in the series. Delia Pitts worked as a journalist before earning a Ph.D. in African history from the University of Chicago. After careers as a U.S. diplomat and university administrator, she left academia to write fiction. Delia is the author of the Vandy Myrick Mysteries, featuring a Black private investigator in New Jersey. The first book in the series, Trouble in Queenstown, was published by Minotaur Books in 2024. And I got to tell you, I love that first line in that book. The second entry, Death of an Ex, also published by Minotaur, will be released on July 15th this year. Delia is a member of the National Board of Sisters in Crime. She is also active in Mystery Writers of America and Crime Writers of Color. Welcome, Delia and Myra.
Well, this is wonderful. And thank you so much, Delia. I know on the East Coast, and everybody joining us from the East Coast time zone, thank you so much for doing that. We know it's a little bit late. Welcome, Delia. And let's start with where you started. How did you start writing fiction? We want to hear your story.
Well, I say it, and it's absolutely true. I sold my first story when I was in second grade. I typed up a pastiche on the great Walter Farley Black Stallion stories. It was about a girl with a red stallion, but it was a valiant girl and a noble horse. And I wrote this story and sold it for 2 cents in the school's spring fair. So I think ever since then, I've been trying to get back. Yes, I loved Black Stallion books in first, second, and third grade. And obviously it inspired me. That was in effect fan fiction, although I had never heard of the term, obviously, until many, many decades later. But I've always loved writing. I've always been at it. And I got great support from my parents. My mother typed that story up so that we could mimeograph it back in the old days. And awesome. So that's how I got started.
Well, that's great. And we're going to get back to the fan fiction thing, because that's just fabulous to hear about. But first, you had a strong professional history before you started writing. You want to tell us a little bit about some of the interesting things that you've done before you started writing for full-time?
Sure. While I was still in high school and then through college and graduate school, I worked at the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper first as a copy boy, as we were called in those days. We were boys, despite no matter what our gender was. And we did everything from sharpening pencils to running copy through the newsroom to fetching coffee to following after the inebriated reporters and getting them back to their desks on deadline. That was the copy boys' not unexciting life. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I moved on from being a copy boy to working still on the Sun-Times. I ended up writing feature stories. I did spot news reporting. I did a lot of summer fill-in reporting. So I ended up going to the coroner's office when that reporter was off his beat doing vacations. I worked on the copy desk where I wrote headlines. So I did a lot of work with the Chicago Sun-Times and definitely thought of journalism as my first career option. But at the same time, I wanted to more deeply pursue my love of history. And so I did work on a Ph.D. At the University of Chicago. I was still doing work, writing news reporting for the Sun-Times while I was in graduate school, doing my studies and research at the university. And then after I finished and earned the Ph.D., I went on to a variety of different jobs, focusing on my international interests, particularly on Africa. And I worked for a short time at the World Bank as an education economist focused on West Africa. And then when I was lucky enough to marry my husband, who was a career Foreign Service officer, I joined the Foreign Service of the United States. And he and I served abroad in several different embassies. We served in Nigeria and Lagos, the American embassy in Lagos. We served in Mauritania, also in West Africa, and then we served for 3 years in Mexico City. We also served in between those. We served in Washington, D.C. I was a Foreign Service officer focused on cultural affairs, on information affairs. And so I got the most fun of any job, I think, because I got to work with educators, with artists, with writers, with journalists, with anybody in the worlds of culture. And it was a ball, a blast. Librarians.
You got a heck of a foundation for your writing today.
I think I was lucky. I was lucky with that.
But here's the part that really got me. So you used to be known as Blacktop, and you told me about this whole fan fiction world. Could you tell everybody about that? Why you're Blacktop, that was because you were writing fan fiction. Tell us about that.
It was because I used to have dark hair. I think if I'd started a little later, maybe I would have been gray top. But when I started writing fan fiction, I still had very black hair. So that's what I called myself. I did that toward the latter part of my professional money earning career when I worked as a university administrator in several different higher education institutions in Texas and in New Jersey. But what fan fiction is taking the characters and the themes and the world created by another artist, another creator, and then taking those themes and making them my own through my own fiction. Fan fiction has been around as long as there's been actual source material. Some of the most well-known are certainly in covering Sherlock Holmes. That's one where you see a lot of fan fiction written about, but it covers any genre. You see fan fiction about movies, about television shows, about any kind of novel, about almost any walk of life. What's interesting about fan fiction is that it's not for profit. The people who write it and who post these stories are doing it for love. They do it because they love the characters, they love the questions raised by the particular source material, and they are part of a fandom which focuses on that source. I, for instance, first learned about fan fiction because I was a rabid fan of the television show House. I loved that show. I loved Hugh Laurie, and I would love to discuss that. And one of the parts of discussing is reading fan fiction. Fan fiction sort of fills in those gaps that the shows often leave out, and the fan fiction writers then contribute our own take on those characters and those storylines.
So what did that do for your writing in writing crime fiction? What did that bring to you for your writing now, your writing today?
Well, I certainly wouldn't equate it to getting a Master of Fine Arts for sure. But what it did was put you in very direct contact with readers. The feedback is almost instantaneous. I would post a story on one of the important fan fiction websites, and I would sometimes that evening get responses from readers. Now, the fans were very kind. I wrote in the area or the fandom of Person of Interest, which was a CBS television show focused on crime and science fiction, sort of crossed that border. And the fandom was very kind. So you rarely got flaming responses that tried to tear you down. But you could certainly, I felt I learned a lot about my own writing, how to craft a scene, how to write dialogue, how to write effects that I wanted to generate in my readers. And certainly I knew the stories that landed, that hit with readers, that got them going, because they would tell me they got them
Nice.
going. And then of
Nice.
course silence is a way of criticizing too. And the stories that I wrote that weren't as successful just didn't get very many comments, and I learned something from that as well.
Yeah.
So I wrote over 60 short stories. And
Wow.
as one friend put it, that's like 5 books. You realize? And I said, that's true.
Wow.
It's a lot of writing. I also got a lot of people encouraging me, people who were reading my fan fiction, who were saying, boy, if I could write like this, I would go write an original story, not based on someone else's characters, and
Right.
see what I could do in the publishing world with my original fiction. After you get that feedback a lot, you start thinking, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I should try my hand at this.
That is so cool. That's really exciting. Like somebody wrote in the chat, and maybe we could take a couple of questions, Chris,
Sure.
from the chat, but let's not go too long because we want to talk about the book. So let's grab a couple of questions from the chat, Chris and
Okay.
and Delia, and then I might be rude and cut you guys off, but start going, start going with that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, there are a few questions here already. The first one was, what was it like to work with the coroner when you worked at the Chicago Sun-Times?
That was my first experience of seeing a dead body. And I did not want to duplicate that, I have to say. I wasn't working with the coroner. I was sent as a reporter to the hearings that the coroner held, and I would simply sit in the audience, in the gallery with everybody else attending, and take notes on the events. One of the things that was most striking to me in those days was being sent once on an assignment to visit with a family whose husband had been shot down the night before in a drive-by incident. And I drove out with the photographer from the Sun-Times, and I remember so clearly going to that house and thinking, I just don't want to do this. I don't want to intrude on the dire situation, the dreadful circumstances of this family's loss. But when I got there, people were so welcoming. The family was open to me. I stayed there all afternoon. They talked and talked and talked and talked about their husband, their father, their son. And I realized as I was talking to them that my presence was part of their process, part of their healing, and part of the recognition. They felt, in a strange way, honored that their loved one would be recognized, at least in his death, in a major newspaper with a major article about him and his life and his impact in the community. And that really was a strong lesson to me about what dignity means, what being unheard means to a family and a community. And that really stuck with me, seeing the impact of grief and seeing how that is not taken away, not transferred, but ameliorated, you could say, by recognition and by giving a voice to the unheard.
Yeah,
That's beautiful. Yeah. Another question was, where do you find fan fiction?
There's a couple of important websites. Fanfiction.net is one of the important ones. A very important one is Archive of Our Own. And for short, it's called AO3, but its long full name is Archive of Our Own. Archive of Our Own has won prizes for its being a site where you can find fan fiction in every conceivable genre. You can find science fiction, you can find fantasy, you can find crime fiction, you can find fan fiction based on cartoons, you can find fan fiction based on Lord of the Rings, you can on Star Wars and Star Trek, and every kind of Robin Hood, anything. But Archive of Our Own is the place I would send most people to. It's a wonderful site. It's easy to read. It's free. It's free to post. That is where writers can post their stories. It's free for readers to read, and it's free for readers to comment. I put my last story up in my collection, I would say 8 years ago. I still, every week to this day, get 1 or 2 comments. People go there looking for stories and they write about them and they comment. It's a very wonderful feeling to see that your stories are still having impact 8 years after they were posted
That's awesome.
on
That
AO3.
is awesome.
So
Wow.
I want to get into the book and then we'll do more questions.
Mhm.
So the book is Death of an Ex. Delia Pitts expertly writes about family, race, class, and grief in her mysteries. Vandy Myrick captured readers and critics' hearts in trouble in Queenstown. She returns in Death of an Ex, where Vandy tries to piece together what brought her ex-husband's life to an end. Queenstown, New Jersey feels big when you need help and tiny when you want privacy. For Vandy Myrick, that's both a blessing and a curse. Now that Vandy's back in Q-Town, her services as the town's only Black woman private investigator earn her more celebrity or notoriety than she expected. Keeping busy with work helps Vandy deal with the grief of losing her daughter, stitching the seams, cementing the gaps. The memories will always remain, and they come crashing back to the surface when her ex-husband, the father of her daughter, Phil Bolden, walks back into her life. He promises everything until she answers her door to the news that Phil has been murdered. Vandy decides Phil is now her client. It's hard to separate the Phil that Vandy knew from the one known to Queenstown. She sees him and their daughter in Phil's son, who attends a prestigious local high school. She sees a complicated marriage with Phil's wife. She wonders of all the roles Phil performed as a parent, husband, and businessman, philanthropist, which role got him killed? So let's talk about Death of an Ex. But first, where did you find Vandy? How was she created?
Vandy is a character that I had been thinking about for a long time. I've looked back in my notes and I had ideas about writing a Black woman private investigator that go back probably 8 years plus, long before I actually wrote any of these books. I have loved film noir and crime fiction for decades. I remember as a very small child watching Alan Ladd movies and Jimmy Cagney movies, and I don't know why my parents let me watch all these crime fiction, these crime movies about detectives and gangsters and criminals. But I was always enchanted with the private eye as a character, the loner status of the private eye, the swagger, the toughness, the drive, and the ambition of the private eye, Humphrey Bogart, and so on. So I always had it in mind that I wanted to write private eye fiction. That was what sang to me. That's how the stories came into my head.
Yeah.
I wrote first a series that I published independently as an indie author that focused on a group of private eyes based in Harlem, a contemporary story, the Ross Agency. And I published those as self-published them as an indie author, had a great deal of fun with that, and recommended highly to anybody. I love being an indie author. I found that I was controlling in a bunch of ways that I didn't realize I was. I'm not a businesswoman at all, but I found I had sort of a little bent for that, for promotion and advertising and all of that. But I always knew I wanted to write a woman private investigator. And
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting. So you had the agency in your indie books. And one thing you do with Vandy, like we talked about, she doesn't have that, I don't want nobody, no way, no time. She doesn't have that typical private eye thing where she's alone. She doesn't work alone. So
right.
were you influenced at some point of why you wanted her in Community?
Yes, I look back still to my days in Chicago where I grew up, And one of the influences that gave me the inkling of an idea was my cousin, who's several years older than me, still alive and very active in Chicago. Her name is Esther Myrick, and that's exactly where I got that name from. Esther, when I was growing up, as I said, she's several years older than me. So as I was a teenager, she was a young woman, and she and her husband in the 1970s founded a small security agency on the south side of Chicago. I'm sure that Esther did not solve murders or kidnappings or extortion rings or any of the other horrific things that I imagine for my detectives, but her agency did provide physical security for individuals. They did job recommendation searches, employment searches, insurance fraud investigations, this kind of thing. And I remember at the time being so impressed and thinking, this is something that it's not common that a younger woman, she was in her late 20s, early 30s then, a younger woman could take on, certainly not a younger Black woman on the south side of Chicago. And that stuck with me. And so when I came to writing Vandy's story, obviously I took her name. Vandy is not Esther. She is not my cousin by a long shot, but I was inspired by the path that Esther showed to me, and I think showed to other people, of what a determined professional woman could accomplish in a very male-dominated society. To speak to your specific question, I wanted to play with a lot of the tropes that we find in private eye portrayals, whether it's in books, short stories, novels, or in movies and television, where you have a tough guy, first of all, usually a white guy, who is very much on his own, who follows his way and no other way. And I wanted to say, well, let's tweak that a little bit. Obviously, I tweaked it, first of all, by having a Black woman as my main character. I made Vandy, however, not be someone who was as lone wolfish as you found in the classic private investigator stories. She has what I call a circle of resilience. She has a group of women around her who support her, who back her up, who bring her up when she's down, and she's down often in her life, as it's turned in tragic ways after the death of her daughter, which precedes the opening of the first book. But I wanted to set her in a different way and to understand that have her understand that she's a member of a community, that there are people that she can look to for advice, for support, even though she is her own operative, and she can't be out on a limb by herself. And I thought that was an important twist or tweak to the private eye, the classic private eye story. I also tweaked in a number of other ways. Vandy,
well, I was going to bring up one. One of the incredible tweaks you did is with her dad. You know, Vandy's dad is a retired police officer who has Alzheimer's.
yes.
And, you know, he doesn't recognize her, but from time to time he's in and out. But what you did was give him a significant role in both books. He isn't just someone they visit in the wheelchair. You know, he has an integral part of portions of these stories. What made you do that?
Well, I thought it was, again, important to understand who Vandy as a character was, who she was as a woman. And first off, she is named after her father. Her name, Vandy, is a nickname off of his name, which she shares, Evander. And I thought that was important to establishing who she is, where she comes from, why she got into the crime fighting business to begin with is because of her father, and what she's lost even before the death of her daughter, what she's lost in not having access to her father anymore as an adult. I also, however, thought it was important to portray her father as not a side character, as one who certainly is diminished in his mental capacity, but he's physically strong, he's robust, he's typically in very good humor, and he's very active and is a participant in the drama as well as in her life. She
And he
visits
knows.
him regularly, but certainly from the point of view of plot, I found it interesting to say, no, as you pointed out, he's not just sitting on the sidelines playing
Yeah.
cards in a nursing home. He,
Yeah.
both his past and
Yeah.
his present
Yeah.
situation is crucial to the understanding of
Well,
and the pushing forward of the plots.
Well, I was going to say, Dad has secrets. And so, that really adds another incredible layer. So, with that, Chris, I wanted to get some tips from Delia, but first, why don't we open up the floor again and ask some of the questions that are stacking in the chat?
Okay, that sounds good. One is interesting. Do you have interactions with, or did you have interactions with the CIA operatives when you were serving in the U.S. embassies overseas?
Not that I know of. I know that they were
You don't
there.
always know those guys.
I know that they were there.
Like a school teacher. I mean,
Yeah.
no, seriously, I knew a couple of them. It's kind of like, what? You look like a librarian.
I had my guesses, but no, I did not know who they were, and I wasn't supposed to know who they were.
Yeah,
That's good.
that's a
I'm
great
sure they
answer.
were there.
That sounds good. Okay, another one is they wanted to know when we can buy your memoir.
Right?
I love that.
When someone gives me a contract to write it, I guess I'll write it.
Great
good.
answer.
That's good. Okay, got one more. Since you enjoyed your experience with self-publishing, why did you decide to go the traditional route with Vandy?
Well, it almost, I could say it decided me. It's I was very fortunate to write not only full-length novels, which I published, the 6 books that I published as part of the Ross Agency Mysteries that I published independently, but I also published a number of short stories, and they got some recognition. And through those short stories and people seeing them, I have to say, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds too easy, but I was approached by an agent. I was approached by an editor. I was of short stories. I was approached by an agent, and I wasn't opposed to it. In fact, people said, "Are you against having an agent?" And I said, "Well, no, but I'm not actively querying at that point." But I wasn't turning him down and I engaged in a conversation, and after some discussion we came to an agreement, and I took on an agent as in effect a business partner, which is what agents are. And I was very fortunate. He's the greatest agent in the world, I think. And it's not only me who says that. One of his clients is Sean Cosby, S.A. Cosby, who says the same thing, greatest agent in the world, Josh Getzler. And so I was fortunate that Josh, my agent, was able to push forward and get me a nice contract with Minotaur, with Macmillan, and Minotaur is the imprint for crime fiction there. So that I was certainly I did not hold myself apart from that, but I never imagined that would be possible. But when he said, "Do you have a story we can put forward to these publishing houses?" I said, yes. And I knew I had Vandy in my mind, in my back pocket, if you will. And because I had been thinking so long and so hard about her, the process of actually putting her on paper, on the screen, became very smooth for me. That is, getting the first draft out there. So that's I had a sort of a backwards way of getting into that aspect of publishing. But very fortunate, and I'm very grateful
Great.
for that support.
So
I don't have another question, but we do have a
okay.
lot of comments about how people love Sean Cosby.
I know, I
Yes.
see
So,
that.
yeah.
I saw that. I saw that. Well,
He's a great guy.
I ask everybody this, and I hope nobody gets irritated with this question. All right, planner, pantser, plotter, where do you fall in all that?
I think I've evolved, Myra. I think when I started out, certainly when I was writing my short stories as a fan fiction author, and when I was writing my indie books, I was very much of a pantser. The thoughts would come to me, and I felt very comfortable in letting them fly and finding where they went. As I've gone along, I've become much more controlled and systematic in my approach, and I find that it's helpful to me in getting my process going and getting over those mini slumps. If I have an outline that I work from, I work from with a number of tools, most of them handwritten, because I'm barely literate on computers. I don't use Scrivener. Yes, I do still write short stories. In fact, see that question, Chris?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to
No,
put
that's
that
all
in.
right.
No,
That's all right.
that's good.
I have two coming out this year. Both featuring private eyes who are not Vandy, but who are women private eyes, and so I'm having yes, in fact, one they're coming out. I hope by between summer and fall. So yes, I'm still very interested in short stories and having fun doing them.
So if you had to give us 2 tips from your journey, from your experience in writing, what would they be? What would be a couple of things that you'd say that for anyone to consider because it's worked great for you?
I would say one is believe in yourself. I think trust your instincts. Your instincts are the best. Everybody else's instincts have to come second to yours. But listen to advice, listen to suggestions, listen to tips. Believe your beta readers when they tell you things. I worked with, when I was doing indie publishing, I
Yeah,
had a
that's good.
fabulous editor who was superb, professional editor that I paid. In addition to beta readers, whom of course you don't pay, I feel that getting a professional editor really helped me be prepared to go into the professional end of the publishing business with my um, um, Macmillan-based stories and books, because I'd already worked with a professional editor on my indie books. And I think getting that was a very important element. It was painful at the time because it cost money, but on the other hand, I learned so much from her. I also learned a lot, still as an indie author, from people who I would consider who were authenticity readers, who read for me a couple of the books that I produced that featured, for example, trans characters. And I wanted to make sure that I had an authentic eye on that story, or that
Yeah.
novel, really. And I benefited a huge amount from having an authenticity reader from that community. So I would say a couple of things. How did I find that one? I simply, because I'd worked at a university and I was close friends with the LGBTQ advisor's office in the university. I simply called up my colleague in that office and said, "Hey, do you have anybody who maybe an ex-student or a colleague?" And my friend said, "Yeah, I happen to know this guy. He works now in New York, and he would do you a great job." So that person put me together with this person. This was not a professional authenticity reader. He was a counselor for young people, young trans kids in New York. But he did, and was himself a trans man. He did a marvelous job of reading with great sensitivity and insight and humor my story. He shifted that book in big ways that were important.
Wow. Chris, do you have a couple more? Or you want me to keep going?
I have two.
Okay, go for it.
Did your early love of detectives have anything to do with your choice of a spouse who was in international government work?
That's great.
How
That
did you
is a good
meet?
question, and I don't think so at all.
It just happened.
But we met over our mutual love of African affairs and African history, and we loved service in Africa. And no, I don't think he likes them too. He likes film noirs too, my
Okay.
husband. So that works.
Yeah.
But I fell in love with him before I realized that he liked film noir.
Okay. That's good. Okay, the other one, June is asking, how do you find authenticity readers?
Well, I think I already answered that. I talked about how I did, which
Okay.
was that I consulted with colleagues of mine at the university where I had worked, and talked to
Okay.
people in the
In that
LGBTQ
group.
office
Okay.
at that university, who were friends and colleagues of mine, and asked them for recommendations of either current students or better, because I wanted someone slightly older than a traditional age student. So I got some recommendations of young adults that had been students at the university where I worked.
So how do you get started? Do you start with a ton of research? Do you start with the kernel of an idea? Or what do you more often than not do when you get started on a new book?
I start with an idea, a kernel of an idea. And in this case, since I have an ongoing series, I start with, how can I get Vandy in the toughest spot possible? Give her the biggest pain possible, and then let her work her way out of it.
Ooh.
I was thinking, I now think back to writing book one, and one of the points I wrote on hardest was, what was the name of her ex-husband? Now, if you read book one, you will see that Philip Bolden is only referred to probably once or maybe twice in book one by name. We know she's divorced, but I spent a long time making sure that name worked for me, because I knew as I was writing book one that he was going to be a core figure in book two. I knew that I wanted to work that aspect of her life into the story of book two. I didn't, so I needed a name that I could live with. Even if he was a difficult character, his name needed to be not difficult. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that name, even when as I was writing the first chapters of book one. So I start with an idea. In this case, it was what the title says, The Death of an Ex. And I thought, what can put her through the ringer? Testing both her professional skills and her personal identity, really, and letting her explore that aspect that has only been hinted at in book one.
You did do that. The sun is all of a sudden coming through. I hate to be one of those people who complains about the sun, but the sun is, hey, stop it. It's coming through. So Chris, I see another question. You want to do that one? And then I have one more.
Okay. Well, yeah. Are you working on the third Vandy book now? And if you are, can you give us a sneak peek?
I don't have a title, because every title that I've ever suggested to my editors have been rejected. So there's no point in mentioning the working title. It's never going to be that title. But I do have an idea. And yes, I am working on book three. I was happy that Minotaur wanted to see a book three. And I was really excited to do that, to work on, give Vandy some more difficulties. And if you read the end, the very, very last paragraphs of book two, you will run into or hear about a key character who will appear in book three. Some of the decisions she takes at the very end, the last chapter, last paragraph really, will lead directly into some of the activities that she follows up in detail in book three. So it's it looks at this third book rather, looks at another side of town, the very wealthiest side of town. This is the one percenters and their impact on the town, none of which is good. That's just the way I'm presenting it. But Vandy gets mixed up with a very rich and long storied family in Queenstown, and helps them work through some of their difficulties.
Nice.
That's
All
good.
right.
Have you ever had or expanded a short story into a novel, or spun something from a novel into a short story?
Well, in fact, one of the stories the story that was included in Best American Mystery and Suspense for 2021 was in fact a fill-in, a story that filled in after the end of I think it was the fifth book or the fourth book that I wrote in the Ross Agency series. Several people after reading that said, no, you can't stop there. I had stopped, that novel stopped with the main character, the Private Eye Rook, and his girlfriend driving a gangster's girlfriend off on a southern trip to get her out of the clutches of the bad guys in New York City. And that was the end of the story. And I thought it was a pretty good ending. We just see them heading off on the road toward Florida. But many people came to me and said, no, wait, what happened when they went on this trip toward the South?
That's great.
And I thought, well, that is actually a good question. And so I wrote a story. I called it The Killer. And Steph Cha, who was the series editor for Best American Mysteries and Suspense, chose it as one of the books for 2021.
Nice.
I'm sorry, for one of the stories to be included in that collection of Best American Mysteries and Suspense. So in fact, yes, it was directly based on, it was a short story directly based on a novel. And I can tell you, it was that story which attracted the attention of my agent and got them to think about me in some
Cool.
positive ways. So
That's awesome.
yes, I have done that.
That's
The door
awesome.
that opened.
So
Yes.
I want to get something in here. Look, we appreciate your service. I mean, the sync board, you chair the DEI-JB committee, which I sit on.
Yay.
You know, you really give a lot of your time. And as someone mentioned in the chat, you're so supportive of other writers. You just, you know, have such a big heart and you do such wonderful things. How does sync impact your writing career? What has this organization done for you?
I think it's done everything for me. It is a community of people who support other writers selflessly. And that is so impressive to me, to every day to see people in sync at all levels, whether it's in the chapters, in the national board, whether it's on the discussion groups or the webinars, people helping other writers. There's always a hand up to a person. I think of it the way people talk about how do you improve your profession, any profession really. And this is said to me about tennis, however, every day you play with a person who is stronger than you and you play with a person who is weaker than you.
Wow.
And if you do that every day, you are contributing. And if you think about it, everybody's doing that every day. We are building a community and we're building up the organization. I really enjoy everyone that I've met, especially Myra, but everyone I've met on our committee, our diversity committee. We do important work. We do the work that needs to be done. It's the needful work. It's tough work. We have tough discussions. We have exciting discussions.
Yeah.
But we recognize that writing itself is a solitary activity, obviously. By definition, everybody here on this discussion knows that. But we need community. We need to hear from other people who are following along the path that we're on, whether they are ahead of us, whether they're beside us, whether they're coming up to where we are now. we benefit by learning their stories, by hearing how things work in the publishing field. Publishing is so opaque. It is not at all clear. It is not clear to anybody how publishing works. And that's people who've been in it for 20 and 30 years and they still don't know how it works. So the more people that you can reach out to, that you can hear from, that you learn bits and pieces about how the publishing industry works, how writing works, it is very, very helpful. I love the webinars that Sync puts together. I think they are fantastic, whether they're ones like this at the chapter level, and we have some amazing chapters across the country who have put together, especially since the COVID times, have put together some dynamite webinars. Yes, I see someone referring to the summer sprints. We had wonderful, talk about community. When you sit there in silence, knowing that there are 20 other people also sitting in silence at the same moment, writing away at their little typewriters, it is a marvelous, uplifting experience. Sync also sponsors many prizes for libraries, recognition of the important role that libraries play in our lives as writers and readers. Sync is very strong in supporting independent bookstores and gives a monthly prize to, or every other month prize to independent bookstores in recognition of their contribution. Sync gives monies in support of emerging writers in various categories. And that is also very important. Sync is a big sponsor of some of the major crime conferences, crime fiction conferences like BoucherCon, like Left Coast Crime, like Malice Domestic. And that's also important. Sync is a voice. Sync's primary purpose is advocacy. Sync's founding purpose, founded by Sarah Paretsky, the great writer of crime fiction and private eye, women private eyes. Sarah Paretsky started this organization in order to advocate for underrepresented voices, in particular for women. And we have found it our job to continue that advocacy mission in current circumstances so that we look to other communities that don't have a voice, don't have as much representation in the crime fiction field as perhaps they ought. And that's the mission, that's the advocacy mission that is at the heart of what Sisters in Crime does. I find it very much resonates with me, and it helps me as a writer. It helps me think about how I write, what I write, who I write for, and who I serve through my writing.
That's awesome. And Chris, I see a question about it says Queensland, but Queenstown.
Yeah.
Queenstown.
How did you come up with Queenstown? What did you put together to make that town, city?
Well, Queenstown is located precisely where the small town that I live in New Jersey is. It's about 9 miles east of Princeton. It's exit 8 on the New Jersey Turnpike, but my actual town has a different name. I then found that what I liked about Queenstown, when we first moved here 24 years ago now, one of the things we noticed right away as we were enrolling our sons in high school was the diversity of the school district. One of the first things I read when I was going about the paperwork was that there were something like 55 different languages spoken in our school district in this very small town.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a different aspect of small town life that you don't read about as often as you should. These communities are diverse. They are multilingual. They are multicultural. They have class and economic distinctions, religious distinctions. I live within walking distance of the central mosque of central New Jersey, and of a Jewish temple in the opposite direction. We have maybe 10 minutes away the largest Hindu temple in the East Coast of the United States. These are all within, I can't walk to some of them, but I could walk to some of them. The point is that I wanted to see how I could represent this kind of a diverse community. It's not as monotonal and monochromatic as is often portrayed, as small towns are often portrayed. And I found that intriguing. And that was 24 years ago when I first arrived here.
Wow. Well, Chris asked if you could share the first line of your first book, and do you have it? Because I'm trying to pull it up.
Yeah, it's easy.
Oh, you got it already?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. And before we close, you got to show us your cover of Death of an Ex.
Sure.
Okay.
This is the first. This comes out actually. Trouble in Queenstown comes out in paperback July 15th. So you can get that new version, same book, soft cover. The first line of the chapter 1 of this book is, I was horny. After a week-long dry spell, the itch was nagging again, a pesky throb teasing my gut. I knew just where to go for a scratch. Queenstown men were plentiful and lonely at the King's Cross Tavern, so I quit my office at 10 p.m. to navigate Center Street in search of a fresh one. That's Vandy Myrick.
Now I understand why Karen liked it so much. That's what Chris wrote. All right.
This is book 2.
Yep, cover of Death of an Ex, you guys.
Death of an Ex. And as a reviewer said, well, when her ex-husband is killed several chapters in, you won't be surprised unless you've somehow forgotten the title of the book. But if you haven't forgotten the title of the book, you will know that this is about a death of an ex-husband.
Yeah. Well, I can speak.
It's coming out next week.
The ride after he dies is, that's where you got us.
Of course.
Yes,
of
we
course.
know he dies, but it's the journey. So have we run our course here, Karen? Do we have any more, Chris?
We're just revving up.
Wows and love it and all that. Great comments here. Thank you so much, Delia. I know it's late for you, but thank you again. And thanks to everybody who logged on today. And Karen, I leave it to you.
Okay, thank you. I echo what Myra said. Thank you, Delia, so much for being here with us. Thanks everybody for coming, and go buy her books.
Yes.
Okay, good night.
Good night, guys.